regulatory affairs webinar series that we have been hosting. I am Deblina, and I will be your moderator today. This webinar is brought to you by Biotech Connections Singapore and together with ARPA. So if you're joining us for the first time, Biotech Connections Singapore, or BCS, is a non-for-profit organization, and our mission is to promote entrepreneurship in all areas of healthcare. We have a very diverse and large membership, and we're extremely active in hosting events and webinars, and we publish different kinds of articles, and we also provide consulting services. I will show you a few slides on ARPA, just to tell you what they do. So ARPA, or Asia Regulatory Professionals Association, was established in 2010. It also has a very large membership base, about over 4,500 members. Please join them if you're interested. The membership is free. They have their own publications as well. So they have brought together this Handbook of Medical Device Regulatory Affairs in Asia. And this was the first of its kind to be launched in Asia. They also partner in education, and they have several universities that they partner with, including our very own NUS and NTU. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Arkan Zwick. He is the Corporate Regulatory Affairs Director of Chroma Pharmaceuticals in Australia. He has over 11 years of regulatory affairs, and he provides, he's responsible for different things within his company, starting from in-house legal advice to contract management, mergers and acquisitions, and intellectual property projects. He has a master's degree in law from the University of Vienna and a PhD in European law, and he's a lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences in Vienna and a speaker on life cycle conferences. So it is with pleasure. Over to you, Arkan.
Thank you very much, Deblina, for that kind introduction. Just try to share my screen, then we can take it on from there. Okay, I think this is what you should see, the first slide. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's really a great pleasure to be with you guys. Good afternoon to all of you. Already said a couple of things about myself. So I'm basically the in-house regulator here in a typical European pharmaceutical device medtech company, joining the company back in 2007. And since then being involved in merely all the in-house projects that a fast-growing company can have to implement, means European compliance, international registrations, and doing everything that we can sell our products in the European Union and worldwide. Product-wise, we are coming from ophthalmology, orthopedics, and in the past years focusing more and more on aesthetics medicines. So this is where our focus is. Medical device-wise, we have especially high-risk products. So we have class 3 implantation products, products that are resorbed, and we also have drug-device combinations. So this is the context that we are dealing with. And yeah, one of the hottest topics in the past months and the years since back in 2017, when the first drafts were published, is the MDR, which is something that I have the pleasure to talk to you about today. So thank you very much for the Biotech Connection for having organized this.
I'm sorry, yeah? I'm just interrupting. It seems no problem. We cannot see your slides.
Okay. You don't see my slides? Okay, then let me come back. This is one. Thailand.
Yes, yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Perfect.
Yes.
Super. Okay, so yeah, so MDR, which is something we're dealing with on a regular basis over the past months, and that's the topic of the talk today. So thank you very much for the Biotech Connection Singapore for organizing this in ARPA. I have the pleasure to work with ARPA since a couple of years, also having the opportunity to write one or the other chapter in the Handbook for Regulatory Affairs, which is quite unique in this area, really summarizing a different perspective from regulatory affairs professional. So I would really encourage you to have a look, or probably you know already this handbook. What I would like to give you an outline is basically, if you are new to the European market, to say a few words about what the European MedTech market is, so what is it consisting of, and then we're going to rush immediately into the MDR. There is a couple of news. Probably you have heard about the delay in the date of application, in the deferral, so we talk about this. There will be a couple of transition elements that I would like to give you an insight so that you really have an understanding how this transition is impacting the industry and the notified bodies. Everything is basically moving in this area. So I would like to understand what is the impact on the industry. And then we finalize with some take-home messages from my perspective, and then I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. While doing this, we have prepared a couple of polls that I would encourage you to participate in. And maybe we start with the first one, which is the poll one, in order to give you the possibility to think about the status of your product. So what is the status of your medical device products in the European Union market? Do you have devices? You need to prepare for the MDR. Do you have no products on the market, but you have an R&D pipeline? And yeah, or do you have? Are you not sure if your product is really affected by the MDR? We'll wait for a couple of seconds in order to receive the results of that. That's good. So I see that the majority is basically having an R&D pipeline. So you have early time enough to prepare. I also see that around 40% have products already on the market and are immediately impacted. Third part is very good. So a very low range of people who are not sure if they are affected. That means that we have really engaged people in the device sector here. Then let's start with the MedTech market. So it's a market that is basically important, not as much quantitatively as the pharma market in Europe, but still significantly in terms of how many people are employed in that sector. So we have around 730,000 employees in the European Union that are working for the MedTech industry. And the sector is comprised of a quite significant, very dynamic amount of companies, around 32,000 medtech companies that are active in the European Union, in these 27 member states. And the majority of them are what we call SMEs, small and medium-sized companies, which reflects the fact that this is a very dynamic sector with a high growth potential, besides the big players, of course, which are on the market in the European Union. The market itself is the second largest worldwide, as we have this conglomeration of 27 member states which build a common market in the European Union. The basic principle of the CE marking, as you probably know, is as the European Union is still a conglomerate of national member states, the basic principle of the European Union is to harmonize the laws between these member states in order to allow products that are complying to the European regulations for medical device to circulate freely in the common market. And that's the basic principle about CE marking, which is speaking for conformité européenne, which means European conformity. So once a product has the CE mark on it, means has shown the conformity to the European Union requirements, it can circulate freely in this 120 billion market of the 27 member states. This is a share of around 27% of the world's medtech market. In a global position, Europe is the second beside the US, accounting for around 43%, in Europe for 27%, followed by other markets, and important, of course, the old Asian Pacific market, which is very important and very highly dynamic market in the medtech sector, showing most of them higher growth rates than in the European Union. The next slide will give you an idea of who are the biggest players in this consortium of national member states in the European Union. So of course, not only population-wise, but also market-wise, the Germany is the most important state, followed by the France, the UK, Italy, Spain, and some other markets like Switzerland, Belgium, or even Austria with 2.5% and 50% others. UK, as you probably know, has a special position in all of this. The UK has decided to leave the European Union market at the end of last year, but still has bilateral agreements with the European Union in terms of a transition period, making sure that medical devices as well as drugs are accepted on the UK market until the end of this transition, which is currently at the end of this year. And negotiations are ongoing in order to ensure that the bilateral agreement between the UK and the European Union make sure that the products can still circulate freely without additional market access barriers. This is something we should follow closely by the end of the year, how the negotiations are continuing. Having said a few words about the market, let's go immediately into the MedTech regulations. As you are quite familiar with that, probably you would understand that the European classification is more or less following many other regulations on how the risk class is divided. So we have basically these four classes, between one being the low risk products, the class 2A and 2B, and the class 3 being the highest risks. The class 1 can for itself be subdivided then into the class 1 non-steroid and non-reusable and non-measuring function, and those who are class 1 but have either sterility or are reusable or have measuring function. So there are specific rules applied to these. Generally, and very simply speaking, you would have for the low risk categories like the class 1 and 2A a self-certification by the manufacturer, having the possibility based on its full quality assurance system to place the CE mark on the product and being inspected regularly by notified bodies and competent authorities. And for the high risk products, for the class 2B, especially the implants, and the class 3, having a PMA-wise pre-market approval-wise system where the CE marking involves compulsory pre-market approval by a notified body. The system, and we see this in the other slides, is a little bit different than in other parts of the world, because in Europe we still have the system that notified bodies, which are basically not necessarily public authorities or ministries, but private organizations, do the conformity assessment of devices. This is different in other parts of the world where typically the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration authorities, which are encompassed in the ministry system, are responsible for the assessment of the safety and efficacy of devices. There was discussion in Europe during the revision from the MDD to the MDR to really bring the complete device regulatory system into the hands of Medicines Agency competency. This was discussed but not decided. So this basic principle of leaving notified bodies responsibility for conformity assessment was maintained. This slide is basically moving us to the second pole, where we would like to understand a little bit your knowledge about the MDR. So are you an expert? Have you completed already your analysis and preparation? Do you have some basic information but no detailed plan how to do that pathway to the MDR, or are you a newcomer and really need some more details about the complete topic? We wait for a couple of seconds for the result of the poll. Good, good to see. So some of you, 30% around, have some basic information but need more assistance in really getting the pathway through the MDR. The majority, 70%, are newcomers. So I will keep then my language accordingly. And of course, if there's anything unclear, questions remaining until the end of the training, then I'd be happy to answer them also later on. Okay, then let's go immediately into the overview. How is medtech regulated in the European Union? I think you see my cursor here. So I've summarized a little bit who are the decision makers, and you can basically summarize them in 3 layers. So you have first the decision-making authorities, which is involving the European Commission in Brussels, the European Medicines Agencies, who are involved especially in combination products. And then you have basically for pure devices, which do not encompass a drug substance, but really those products who are purely under the device regulations. The system is really governed by the notified bodies together with the member state authorities. Now, what is the difference between these two? The notified bodies are really those who are responsible for the conformity assessment and for assigning and assessing the technical dossiers for the manufacturers to grant the CE mark. And the member state authorities are responsible for the supervision of these. So member state authorities are fully involved in the supervision, accreditation of notified bodies, but also for post-market surveillance, for vigilance activities, or for any other post-market surveillance requirements that involve the manufacturer to be inspected. So typically, as a manufacturer here in Austria, we have one notified body, which is located in Germany, because we are free to choose a notified body in the European Union. We're not bound to our national territory barriers. So this is the notified body we're dealing on a yearly basis for supervision audits and for granting CE marking. And then any member state authorities where we distribute our products, for example, in Austria or in Germany or in Italy, can although on the same way inspect our dossier and our file in case they have any requirements in the post-market area or any questions on the products, on the labelings, on our advertisement activities. So the system involves different decision makers. On the second basis, we have the advisors, which are expert panels located on a European level, and the so-called MDCG. We'll see then afterwards that there is a couple of MDCG guidance documents which are currently issued and which are very important to review and to understand, as they have an impact on what we do on our product compliance. And then on the level of the market, we have the economic operators. So the economic operators are those who are really involved in the manufacturing, distribution, importation, and the authorized representatives of the for the devices on the market. And these are the ones, especially the manufacturer, if he's not located in the European Union, needs to have an authorized representative. These are the ones who are under control by the advisors and by the decision makers. So why has the MDD being revised now by a new regulation? The couples are, the reasons are different ones, as basically the existing system was from the 1993. So it is a system that is significantly old in terms of, was designed a couple of years ago. New is not simply better. So the FDA regulations for devices are even much older. But in fact, there was a couple of issues in the European Union market which led to the fact that the policy has decided really to reformulate the complete regulatory framework. I would compare it to those pharmacovigilance scandals that was shaking the drug sector back in the 1960s and 70s. We had the same in the device world, which was implant manufacturers that were modifying their products and where the implant product caused some serious issues that led to the fact that the system was seen as weak and led then to the initiative to revise the regulatory environment and especially to consider the products who are on the market under the MDD as questionable. So really to ask the complete industry to recertify their products, even though they would say my product has a long market history, it's safe, it's effective. The regulator would consider the majority of them, especially the high risk one, as questionable and really ask for a recertification of that. That's related to this PIP scandal. Then we have some technological and scientific developments in the sector, like software innovation, nanomaterials, absorbable products that would need to be tackled and that need to be revised under the new regulatory system. And one thing that is very much important is really to bring the European Union regulations on the same level with the global international requirements, also in the context of the EMDRF initiative for the harmonization of the regulatory requirements for devices. And we see a lot of the activities today that are really harmonizing the European system together with the EMDRF system. And this is a great advantage, I think, for all businesses and all companies who want to bring devices to the patients on a global scale. For those of you who are new to these terms, directive versus regulation, a couple of words about that. So the existing MDD directive is basically an instrument that is directed to the countries, so to the 27 European Union countries, but only with regards to the results to be achieved, and leaves the European member states and the countries free to adopt respective national laws and measures how to implement it. That means that the directive always needs to be transposed into national law. In practice, for any economic operators who wants to bring his product on the market in the European Union, this means that this actor needs to deal with 27 different national laws. Now, this situation changes dramatically when we talk about a regulation, because the new MDR is a regulation, and this is a legal act that is applicable automatically and uniformly in all European Union countries as soon as it is entering into force, which does mean it doesn't need to be transposed into national law, which makes the system much more consistent and uniform in and between the 27 member states. So this is really a big advantage in moving from a directive to a regulation system in the European Union. Latest news. Maybe you have heard already of it. So the Commission has very quickly responding to the COVID crisis in the European Union adopted some actions in order to propose the postponement of the date of application of the MDR regulation, which was meant to be applicable from May 2020 on. And just a couple of days after this announcement, the revised MDR was passing the European legislators, moving the date of application forward to the 26th of May of 2021. I've inserted here the link to the European legislator, where you can find this latest consolidated version with all the amendments. Basically, there are 3 already done with this latest one that you can find inside. The good news here is that the industry is given more time. Honestly speaking, from an industry perspective, we also consider this as a welcome excuse by the European level to have more time to prepare the system necessary for the industry in order to allow the MDR to be fully operational. Because we have seen over the past year, although there are many activities on the European level, still there are many gaps that remain open in order to really have an MDR system that fully works. And here we can speak about the lack of MDR accredited notified bodies, as well as the lack of, for example, the EUDAMED availability, or many of the implementation regulations that are necessary in order to make the system full operational. So it's a good thing. The deferral is here, and it gives both the European level as well as the industry more time. What does the MDR deferral mean now? It means that the date of application is delayed, so the MDD remains in force for 1 additional year. Other timelines, such as the UDI on label, the maximum validity of MDD certifications until 2024, remain unchanged. A good thing is that if you are in current cooperation with a notified body and you plan to file one or the other MDD project, theoretically still there would be the possibility to do so. So this is something which is very welcomed by the industry, although of course the full priority is maintained on continuous MDR preparation in order to make sure that the industry is well set up by May next year. So let's go immediately then into the dates that you can also find in the regulation text. So the publication of the MDR was back in 2017. Immediately 20 days after, the MDR also entered into force. But the so-called date of application, so the applicability of the regulation, was moved from May 26, 2020 to May 26, 2021. Then another date to take into consideration always is the maximum validity of the MDD certification. This is 2024, and the so-called sell-off date. What does this date mean now on transition for the manufacturers? So you have here again the publication, the entry into force, the date of application, which is May next year, the maximum validity of the MDD, and the so-called sell-off date, which will come then around here later on. So this does mean at the first stage, post date of application, there will be no more insurance of MDD certifications. This is according to Article 121. So no more issuance of MDD certification. Any product that is certified around this date of application can only be certified under the MDR requirements. This does secondly mean, even though equally important, that the products that are renewed under the MDD and that can still be sold under 2024, according to Article 123, are not allowed to have any changes to their design or to their intended use. And there is specific MDCG guidance on what these kind of changes are and how these kind of changes affect the MDD certifications, as they can only be implemented based on new MDR certifications. And the third important point is to understand that even though these products can be the MDD on the market still until 2024, the MDR applies in any case for the requirements on post-market surveillance, vigilance, and the registration of economic operators and devices. So this is something which needs to be considered as a counterpart. This does mean if a company has MDD products on the market, The first thing to do is, of course, the QMS preparations for those requirements in the MDR that I have to comply with in any case. Secondly, if I plan to do any changes to my products, I rather implement these changes and have them approved under my MDD certifications early before the DOA, because after that, according to Article 123, they are no longer possible. And thirdly, it does mean that the majority of the industry really has focused on the renewal of their existing MDD certifications over the past months. Means they want to close all their MDD certifications in order to benefit to a maximum of this transition period until May 2024. Okay, then let's move forward. Having seen this transition period on this MDCG guidance documents that we've seen before. So these are some guidance documents you are certainly interested to see. I don't know if I've entered the link in there, but you can easily Google them. So it's the homepage of the European Commission, DG Growth, where these medical device coordination group guidance documents are published, and you can find a couple of them here related to the UDI. You would see a couple of MDCG guidance documents that are related to clinical investigation and evaluation. For example, guidance on sufficient clinical evidence for legacy devices being exactly those where still on the market under their MDD certifications. There is some very interested guidance on clinical evaluation and equivalence, or on the famous SSCP document, the Summary of Safety and Clinical Performance, which is a document that needs to be written for the high-risk product and is more or less similar like the European Public Assessment reports for drug products that should be publicly available information summarizing safety and clinical performance data of high-risk products. Then there is a couple of other MDCG guidance documents on the transitional provisions, for example, for class 1 products. There is a couple of things about the interpretation of Article 54.2b, which is the article related to the technical dossier inspection requirements for the 2B implants, and some others you would see here. One guidance document that is very interesting in terms of the changes that we've seen in the slide before that may affect my MDD certifications after the MDR DOA, means any change to the design or the intended use. This is the guidance document that specifies how this terminology is interpreted. So what is seen as a change in my design or intended use that is affecting my MDD certification after the MDR DOA. For those of you who are dealing with combination products, so devices having an ancillary drug substance, certainly this guidance document is very interesting, as it gives provisions on the consultation of the Medicinal Products Agency in terms of when transiting from the MDD to the MDR. Let's go ahead with the details on what is the difference between the MDD and the MDR, and you would see that there is many. So just quantitative wise, we're moving from a system which has 60 pages, 23 articles, and 12 annexes to a system where really the quantitative amount of information to be analyzed and digested by the economic operators is significantly increasing. This comes together with 101 entry points. They are marked as whereas. So this is the preamble of the regulation that says specifically why this system is coming. And I really would encourage all of you who would be in the future dealing with the MDR in more detail to read this preamble. Why? Because it is really summarizing in a nutshell, first the major points, and second, why the system has to be implemented. This is followed by 10 chapters and 123 articles that specifies exactly what needs to be done by the economic operators and by the notified bodies and by the competent authorities, followed by 17 annexes that say quite in detail how this should be implemented. And I think comparing this MDR regulation to some other regulatory framework like the Code of Federal Regulation and so on, I think the quality of what the European Union has been drafting here is quite good, and especially the annexes serve as a very welcome instrument to be implemented into our internal SOP system in order to make sure that what we do is in the future in detailed compliance to the MDR requirements. So let's move ahead on what is basically affected by the MDR. And you can see a couple of bullet points here that I would like to go through more in details over the next slide. So the first thing that is definitely affected is the notified body capacities. Why is that? Because the existing notified bodies that we see on the market today involved in conformity assessment are not those who will be remaining on the market over the next year. In the contrary, we see the amount of notified bodies that will be available for economic operators decreasing significantly. So they are first affected. Then, of course, the certification and the technical dossier and the common specifications are heavily affected. Why the certification? Because as mentioned, there is no grandfathering. Those products who are currently on the market under MDD need to re-go under certification under the MDR. And doing this, they have to comply to the new regulatory requirements, and if they are to the new common specifications, if applicable to the product. A third point is the clinical data and the summary of safety and clinical performance, the SSCP. Clinical data being really the core important area where the industry has to invest a lot in order to make sure that my claims and my intended use is really reflected by sufficient clinical data in order to show the safety and efficacy of my product. Claims and advertisement, we will see a couple of rules regarding restricted claims and advertisement rule and under which circumstances they are allowed and not. UDAMED and UDI, something that still we are missing more details on that. There is a couple of functional specifications on the UDAMED. However, the appearance of the UDAMED is postponed until 2022. Until that date, the industry is meant to really get familiar with these and the different modules, and we are really eager to see how the system would be working then in detail. There is more specific distributor responsibilities to what distributor would need to do in Article 13 and 14 of the MDR. There is specific new responsibility, the so-called PRRC, so the person responsible for regulatory compliance, and then a couple of new elements with regard to the post-market surveillance, the PMS area, where we will also see some more information. Together with this, of course, as mentioned in the beginning, the new regulation is replacing the directive, and the regulation, as you know now, is really something that is working immediately in applicable in all the member states. However, of course, there is areas which are not regulated under the MDR, and these, for example, the more detailed advertisement rules or compensation law requirements, they are still subject to national laws, and so manufacturers are also required to monitor the evolvement of the national laws in the member states in order to understand how and if the activities are impacted. We've done this exercise internally in order to compare the MDD wording to the MDR wording with regards to different topics that are typically critical for our products, and you're certainly invited to do the same for the products that you are dealing with. This comes especially for the high-risk products with an increased requirements regarding the clinical, the preclinical, and manufacturing life cycle activities. So if you see, for example, the clinical term is multiplied by 8, you would see some specific terms like absorption, which is increased, or metabolization, which was not at all in the MDD, but is introduced newly into the MDR text. The whole risk area, which is multiplied by 4, and of course focus on the implantation, because the whole trigger for the new regulation was an implant scandal, and together with this the focus on biocompatibility manufacturing and modification and change assessment. So you can see here easily what kind of really changes in where the MDR is basically moving to. Then let's move to the specific topic. So first is the notified capacities. The notified bodies capacities are, as we say, currently heavily under pressure. Why? Because the existing notified bodies all need to go under a new designation program. So the existing ones do not automatically move into the MDR regimes. The existing notified bodies need to be recertified. There are joint assessment audits. In the past, the accreditation of a notified body under the medical device regime was an issue of a national member state together with the European Commission. Today, accreditation of a notified body really involves joint assessment audits by, I think, at least 3 member states coming together with a responsible from the European Commission, doing these joint assessments and making sure that these notified bodies are complying to the latest laws. The current status, in order to give you an idea how many notified bodies have, as of today, got their MDR accreditation. Here is a slide of the European Commission NANDO database. You can easily access that one. And if you type in the regulation 2017-745, this database would give you a list of all those notified bodies that are currently having an accreditation on the MDR. And then if you go in more in details into the notified body link, you would see for which scope these notified bodies are accredited. And this is exactly the situation as we have today. In the past, we are moving from around 60 notified bodies to a situation where, as of today, we have around 13 notified bodies only in Europe. There is others in the pipeline, of course. So there is more in the pipeline that will be issued today. We've heard last week that the French notified body GIMED is also passing their final assessment, so they will be published soon. But it's not clear really how many notified bodies of those who are currently under MDD will still be remaining under the MDR in the next year. So the issue is today is really to find a good notified body that has is MDR certification already done. The next topic is the clinical evidence. Here especially I would like to focus on the high-risk products, on the implant in the class 3. One of the main issues is really that the equivalence is limited. Equivalency approach that was frequently used over the past years by the industry, where referencing clinical data to a similar or equivalent device. This is severely limited. It is more and more difficult really to bridge the clinical evaluation of a product to a reference one. And this is basically followed by additional clinical evaluation consultation procedures for class 3 implants that is involving the European Commission and expert panels. And even after these are finalized, putting additional scrutiny by competent authorities for class 3 implants. So these are really the ones who are heavily under control and more under control than in the past. Additionally, then these SSCP data, so the summary of safety and clinical performance, that will have to be written by the manufacturers, submitted to notified bodies, and in order to really publicly make available the safety and clinical performance information to a broader audience. Together with that, as you've seen in the slide before, there is a couple of MDCG guidance documents and templates to be used in order to prepare the clinical information to the new MDR requirements. Next topic is pre-market and governance. So we will see appearing in the next months to come additional common specification. Common specification is an instrument that comes additionally to harmonized standards. Harmonized standards, or consensus standards, how you would call them in the US, are something that is compulsory to be used by the industry. Of course, only showing compliance to a standard or to a harmonized standard can significantly lead to the conformity, to a positive conformity assessment of a device. Where those harmonized standards are not sufficient, the Commission is free to implement new common specifications, respectively. For those of you who are dealing with devices with non-medical purpose, here specific common specification for Annex 16 products are in the pipeline. Another point that is important to be considered with regards to pre-market and governments is the PRC. This is an entity that needs to be established in the manufacturer's company and also in the company of the authorized representative, having a full responsibility over the regulatory compliance, the vigilance, and the post-market surveillance of the product. This is a new person that is to be established, and companies are currently, if not done already, heavily involved in redefining the company's organization, in order to make sure that this PRC is set up in time. Then we have this MDCG group, so the Medical Device Coordination Group, that is newly on our radar, regularly publishing respective documentations and guideline documents. We see expert panels and laboratories appearing. For the expert panels, we just had in the past months a call for the expression of interest. So we'd see these expert panels to be set up soon, to be involved in things like the clinical evaluation consultation procedures or the scrutiny procedures, especially for the high-risk products. Post-market surveillance and vigilance is reinforced. There will be this central database for coordination, the OIDAMET, which will appear light in 2022. There is something which is new in the regulatory text, which is the trends reporting, Article 88, for incidents having impact on the risk analysis. So manufacturers are required below the level of serious adverse events to detect trendings in their incident rates that may have an impact on the risk analysis, and to take the necessary actions in time and communicate with the authorities in order to make sure that appropriate measures are implemented. Then we have post-market surveillance and post-market clinical follow-up plans and respective reports. These are not really new, but of course, in the context of having to reset the technical dossier on the MDR requirements, they will be reviewed again. And so this is something that we're currently preparing. What is definitely new is, for everything that is above Class 1, periodic safety update reports will need to be written and updated on a regular basis and submitted to notified bodies. This is also one of the elements where currently no clear guidance exists. There is a couple of draft guidance documents circulating that should be published in the fourth quarter this year, in order to allow the industry to prepare in time for this new PSUR requirements. EUDAMED and UDI, which will ensure traceability and transparency. So we will see the devices registered via their basic UDI and the unique device identifier. We will see economic operators to be registered via their single registration number centrally in EUDAMED. This will be applicable both for manufacturers, importers, and the authorized representatives for manufacturers having their seat outside the European Union. Serialization is also coming with implants. They were already in place for active implantables, but now are generalized for all the implant products that needs to be serialized. Let me give you on the next slide the big picture over this post-market surveillance information that needs to be drafted, life-cycled by a typical manufacturer. So it all starts with the risk management of a product according to its intended use and the specific clinical environment where a product will be employed. This is basically really the core document where which serves as a basis for all the following documentation that needs to be in place. And this is first the post-market surveillance plan defined in Article 84, which is the overall plan of what kind of activities will need to be conducted by a specific manufacturer according to the risk of its product. This involves first the post-market clinical follow-up plan, the PMCF plan, and the respective report. So now having this, collecting the information during the foreseen period for all classes, the manufacturer needs to draw up and update on a regular basis a clinical evaluation report, which is updated at least annually, driven by the PMCF report. And for the class 1, the whole information then goes into the post-market surveillance report, which is to be updated according to the post-market surveillance plan of the manufacturer and needs to be available to the competent authority upon request. For those products who are high risk or medium risk, 2A, 2B, or class 3, these information goes into the periodic safety update reports, and they would need to be updated at least annually. For the 2A every 2 years, and for the class 3, additionally submission to the notified body via the EUDAMED electronic system is necessary. Finally, for our class 3 and implants products, we would need to draw up these summary of clinical and performance information, the SSCP documentation. Now let me use this slide in order to do our third poll, which is basically asking the question for which specific device category you are interested in. Is it high-risk products? Is it innovative products like software or combination products? Or is it low and medium risk? Okay, so I see that it's quite equally distributed. So we have a couple of high risk and implant products. Then certainly you would be very interested to see and to analyze again the information which is specifically relevant for the class 3 and implantations. For the drug device combinations, there is no specific information on that slide deck, but would be happy to provide on information later on. Software, of course, which is also considered as a device, there is specific guidance for that, also under the MDCG. And the low risk are exempt for some of the requirements, like the SSCP, but still would, for example, need to apply to these PSUR requirements as soon as the date of application of the MDR is given. Okay, then let's move ahead with the impact of the MDR on our quality management system. So what are the compliance activities with the MDR DOA that needs to be in place? First thing is certainly the post-market module, means depending on the risk class, if you are above class 1 PSUR. There is also the additional requirements for adverse event reporting, as the reporting period for the adverse event, serious adverse event reporting has been tightened. This is the first thing. Second thing is certainly the requirements on the PRC. So the PRC requirements for the manufacturers needs to be implemented also with the DOA. The UDI requirements is something which is new, which needs to be set in place for those of you who are having their certifications done under the MDR. And then the periodic safety update report that I mentioned already here, and the SSCP also needs to be set up, especially for those products who are certified already under the MDR. The fifth provision, which is relevant, is OIDAMED registration and registration of economic operators and the products, which would need to be done with the MDR DOA as soon as the OIDAMED is operational in 2022. And one point that is important for where SOPs needs to be revised is advertisement, distributor, and importer obligations. And of course, as mentioned before, national laws and their adaptations if you are specifically interested in one countries. Let's move to the supply chain control. You've seen here in that overview how the different responsibilities between the main responsible, the manufacturer, and their importer and distributor are divided. One thing is sure that, of course, the manufacturer will be inspected based on the compliance of the conformity of its product to the regulation, but the importer, distributor are fully to be inspected in the post-market surveillance and in the vigilance activities. So it is their manufacturer, respectively, its authorized representative responsibility to make sure that over the supply chain, the compliance is given. This is traditionally ensured via the quality assurance agreement between the manufacturer and the other entities. So let's move to a specific article which is relevant to the distributor in the Article 14 of the MDR, which introduces new obligations or clearer obligations to be complied with by the distributor to verify each time when a product is made available on the market. And you can find specific requirements on what the distributor needs to check, like the certifications, if the device is accompanied with instructions for use in local language, if the importer is identified, if applicable, UDI has been assigned. And the obligation of the distributor is clearly set to not make the product available if he has doubts to believe that the conformity is given. Together with that, we have obligations for forwarding of complaints and to make any of the above information available to competent authorities when requested. This is traditionally a set of obligations that if you have your products in the European Union, make sure that really each of these points is clearly addressed in the quality assurance agreement between yours and your distributor in the EU. What is also important to certainly verify if you have clear provisions regarding claims of your products, because Article 7 introduces clear provisions to use content in any advertisement that is ascribing any function or properties that the device does not have, or creates any false impression regarding the treatment or diagnosis functions of the device, or, and this is particularly new, fails to inform the user of or the patient of a likely risk associated with the use of the device in line with its intended purpose, or, this is clear prohibition of off-label use, suggests uses of the device for any other of those stated to be part of the intended purpose for which the conformity assessment was carried out. This is particularly important to make sure that within the processes of the manufacturer, it is clearly ensured that these provisions are respected. Give you a very concrete example. For this point, for example, the manufacturer is engaged to think whether the full information on the risk appears on any advertisement material, like it would be required, for example, for drug advertisement, or if it is sufficient really to cross-reference the instructions for use and make the user or the patient available that there might be risk associated to the device, and that a more detailed definition of these risks can be found in the instructions for use to be consulted. Okay. Having said this, let's move to the take-home message. So probably you would understand now that the majority of the medtech industry is currently focusing on the renewal of their MDD licenses in really to ensure that the existing MDDs certifications are extended to the maximum period of 2024. Nevertheless, as you've seen in the slide before, there is a couple of requirements that needs to be fulfilled also for those products who are benefiting from the transition. So it is important to assess the impact of the MDR on the product classification, and especially define those products who will be in the pipeline to the MDR to be recertified before this date. One thing that is certainly important to do is the assessment of the gap of your existing intended use and the claims versus the available clinical data, the instructions for use, and the marketing material. One really important thing to take into consideration is that all products will be reassessed. There is no grandfathering. So even though you have your certification extended until 2024, you would need to prepare your pipeline in order to get MDR CE marking anyway around or before this date. Distributors, importers have to review their processes for product release, notifications, traceability, and advertisement activities. There is to be a close link between the instructions for use, the SSCP, and the advertisement activities of any economic operator. And one of the first priorities is the preparation of the QMS. Means that the activities of the distributors, manufacturers needs to be aligned with the PMS and UDI obligations that will apply in any case, even though your products still remain on the market over the transition. Finally, which is also important, is that this puts additional burden to those who want to do business in the European Union in the future, is of course to maintain the regulatory knowledge and a regulatory intelligence process on the European level, but additionally to focus on local device laws that may impact distribution activities in order to make sure that these are not affected in a non-positive way. All right. This brings us to the end of the presentation. And I would like to launch the fourth poll here, which is basically the question on what you would like from your perspective to see more in the future. So we've given you a couple of information here on what probably you can also choose more. Different items. that's a nice picture. So it basically, it's clearly, yeah, it's well equilibrated on one hand. On the other hand, we clearly see that here the clinical evaluation is one of the hottest topic, followed by the technical dossier and regulatory labeling. Yeah, certainly, as you say, the clinical evaluation is certainly one of the most critical points where, yeah, this is important to focus on, and where really the focus should lie, especially for those entities who would need to invest in additional clinical investigation with their product, and where the preparation is of course lengthier than just rewriting the existing clinical data that you have. Having said this, I would like to, of course, thank you for the participation in these polls. I hope there is a couple of questions that still remain open and that we would be happy to answer in the remaining 20 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Arkan. That was really, really informative, and I think a lot of people was really looking forward to your talks. So we do have quite a few burning questions, so I'll shoot. So the first one is, we would like to find out, how will a surgical robot be positioned in EU MedTech regulation? Is it in class 2B?
Well, certainly it's try to figure it out. So it would needs to be checked. So the basis of classifying this product would be to define the criticality of the surgical procedure. I would say, without knowing the details and knowing the described intended use, it would be of course, an active device, probably a surgically invasive device. And in this context, it would be at least a class 2B product, yes. Together with the software and together with all the physical machinery that goes with that, yes.
Okay.
Either 2B or class 3.
Sure. So moving on to our next question, are there regulatory consulting firms that a startup can engage with for their medical device regulations for the EU market?
Yes, of course. So, of course, there is a lot of consultancy companies on the market who do this. The system, and so are we. So, as an in-house regulatory department, we also serve external clients. If you are happy with the services that we provide and the project is also fitting into our time schedule, then certainly we can talk about any of these. So the system in Europe is basically as such as and this is changing and really depending on the notified body you are working with, is you have, of course, the possibility to address the most critical questions in a very early stage, either to the competent authorities or the notified bodies. And we certainly think that this is very critical to do this, especially if you have new product in your R&D pipeline, because you can avoid a lot of difficulties later on the earlier you really are specifically addressing questions like the intended use, the specific clinical environment where the product is used, and the clinical development program of this. So it is really advisable to address these questions in pre-advised meetings with notified bodies. And in order to do so, it is also advisable to engage with a regulatory consultancy that puts the right questions into the right context and to give you the correct answers to move along with the project in the right direction.
Sure. Thank you. So the next question is, with the 1-year delay, is there now an opportunity for startups to quickly obtain CE mark under the old system?
If you have already your quality assurance system in place, and you can do self-certification under the condition that your product is in conformity with the MDD. You can certainly issue your self-certification CE mark and benefit from this maximum transition. If you need involvement for the notified body into this, theoretically still there is the possibility, and it is still the possibility to conclude MDD renewals. Realistically, the notified bodies will close their MDD product portfolio by the end of the year, and they would not do any MDD certification from the fourth quarter on.
Okay. Thank you. So we have a few more questions. What is the difference between a PRRC and an authorized representative?
So the authorized representative is the legal entity that represents the manufacturer. The manufacturer, if the manufacturer is located outside the European Union, like the physical manufacturing site, then they need an authorized representative in the European Union. This is a legal entity that has the full legal responsibility on behalf of the manufacturer for the product in the European Union. The PRC is within this organization a physical person that is responsible to ensure that the product is in compliance with the European device law. So that's basically the function, either the CEO or the regulatory director. That's the function of the PRC. And what the MDR does, it requires specific qualification and experience and specific responsibilities and tasks to this PRC. And that needs to be addressed in the job descriptions and in the local processes.
Okay. So one of our attendees want to find out how will direct-to-consumer mobile apps with a medical purpose, SAMD, be regulated in Europe under MDR. So unlike devices which normally involve a medical gatekeeper, DTC mobile apps do seem harder to track and regulate.
That's a good question because it really depends on what this mobile app does. It can be from a simple software, a consumer software that is not regulated at all, extended towards on the other range, it can be a very critical medical device app that will be fully regulated under the MDR as a software. So it really depends. Here we are back again on the intended use. Depending on the intended use, for example, I give you maybe a stupid example for a software that is just counting my steps over the days without doing anything else. It would not be a device software. For a software that is measuring my sugar level and an app that transmits this information to an algorithm that gives me then the necessity to re-inject insulin, this would be clearly a critical medical device software app. And depending on this intended use, the risk classification is conducted, and depending on the risk classification, the device needs to fulfill all the requirements that a medical device has to be compliant to. Means the preclinical program, all the validations, qualifications, the clinical evaluation regarding the specific intended use, the target population, the clinical environment that this app is used.
I see. So the next question is actually more, I think, a request for future talk is, could we have cover more information on software development area? So,
yes, this is personally not my specific topic, but we've seen, we had a couple of clients who are active in device software, and certainly we can design a couple of workshops around that. I would see, as mentioned in the last poll, also the clinical module as the most critical around this. And here again, to really advise the people to be as precise as possible in the development of the product on the intended use, the target population, and the precise claims that such a software would have. There is also, if you look to the MDCG guidance homepage, there is specific guidance on the clinical evaluation for medical device software that can be read and understood.
Okay. So moving on to, maybe we have time for a few last questions. Could you please elaborate how does the transition from MDD to MDR impact the timelines and cost of CE marking of the various classes of medical devices? Could you please refer to a source which contains timelines and general costs?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, in the regulatory text itself, there is just rarely specific working days mentioned. For example, you would find 210 days for combination products, where the medicines agency would need to give their opinion for the drug substance, but this is limited to combination products. For the majority of the device conformity assessments, the MDR doesn't really set specific timelines for the review process. So given this lack of information, we have to go to the notified bodies and ask their specific review times for especially high-risk products. And here, traditionally, we see tendency really to limit the review period to a 12 months schedule, and all the deficiencies that cannot be closed within the 12 months period would require resubmission of the technical documentation. So this is one thing we can see. The second thing we can see is that cost-wise, the fees are of course increasing, especially for the high-risk products. So we are moving, I'm giving you the example of a class 3 implant, especially if manufacturers are using expedited procedures, we can really see the fees increasing significantly, not only for the review of the documentation, but also for on-site audits. So we can expect increases of 20, 30, 40% in the next years to come. There will be transparency with regard to this. So the regulation requires the notified bodies to make publicly available their fees. So probably you will see this coming up in the next month until the end of the year.
So maybe just one last question, and we could wrap up after this, is how do we deal for multi-site certification, how it affects the labeling for both the manufacturers?
Mm-hmm. Multi-site certification is having two impacts. So regarding the labeling, it is the straightforward answer is that you would only see on the label the name and the address of the legal manufacturer, and the legal manufacturer just has one single address and one DUNS number, irrespective where the physical manufacturing or sterilization or R&D sites are located. So on the label, you would only see one legal manufacturer. If this legal manufacturer is outside the European Union, then you would also see the name and address of the authorized representative. So that's the label part. For the certification part, it depends on whether these physical manufacturing sites are on one campus. If it can be considered as one campus, and there is definition on what this is, all these activities can be summarized under one address, but there is tendency to really list on the backside of the certification all the specific addresses of each of the specific sites where the different steps are maintained or are conducted.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for your insight, and it was really, really enjoyable and informative. I'm sure there will be other questions people are dying to ask, but in the interest of time, we really need to wrap up this session. So thanks again, Arkan. And thanks to everybody or all our attendees who joined in today. I hope you enjoyed our three-part webinar series on regulatory affairs. So keep watching this space. We will keep coming back with other webinars. So thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. All the best for your projects, and yeah, hope to hear from you soon.
You too. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.